The final week of Stage 2 is a few days behind us. We now know the 8 teams that will be competing in the Stage 2 playoffs that begin tonight. So as usual, it's time for me to return to my weekly power rankings, which have benefited from every team having at least played one match in the final week, unlike in Stage 1. I'm aware of some very passionate fans that I have in my audience, so of course I'll just remind everyone quickly, these rankings and opinions are my own, but we're happy to talk about them in the comments below if people disagree. Without further delay, let us begin. If you've been here before, you know that I start with the bottom 5, which doesn't see any new sights, but there's a bit of a shake-up of the teams from this group. At 20 is still the Florida Mayhem, but then at 19 are the Houston Outlaws, after dropping one spot, as the Paris Eternal fall as well, 2 positions to 18. The Washington Justice see themselves rise twice to 17, as the Guangzhou Charge also move up the rankings 1 place to 16. This stage has not been kind to Florida nor Houston, and in my eyes they are clearly the worst 2 teams in the league right now, as they've both ended the stage with 0-7 records. The Mayhem respectively showed some hints at improvement in their series against Dallas, and it's interesting to note they have an uncanny ability to take maps off of most teams they play, but I don't think they showed enough for me to really consider moving them off the bottom, with signings desperately needed to kickstart an upward trajectory, like another side in this grouping. The Outlaws themselves actually gave us a much better performance in their defeat to the Charge, before being stomped by London. I genuinely think that if the meta shifts to allow more DPS heroes to be played, this team could find itself nestling nearer the middle of the pack, but ultimately, a lack of roster acquisition since Season 1 has hurt them in the 3-3 meta, with the flex support and diva positions the biggest weaknesses of many, that has now condemned them to the 0-7 club. My decision to drop Paris might be harsh, especially in hindsight of seeing the Spark, who they forced to 5 maps last week, make the playoffs. But I worry about the implications that a very one-sided loss to Toronto this past week may have on the side moving forward. For most of this stage, it's been a we went close, but came up short, or we got stomped kind of stage for the Eternal. And it's clear that team morale is dangerously low right now, so this long off-season may have come at a perfect time for this team to start working on a turnaround. Washington moves up as a direct result of their consistent, positive improvement to a greater extent than their win over Boston. Of course, the win keeps from going winless this stage, and is a great boost for morale. But for most of this stage, and especially since signing of Sleepy, this team's performance has noticeably improved week on week, unlike a lot of teams in the bottom half of my rankings that might have had high peaks, but also lows and inconsistent runs of form. This might sound very ambitious, but if they look to pick up some young emerging Western talent to develop and grow their team in the coming stages in Season 3, there's a real chance that this team could take a very similar path as San Francisco entering next season. Lastly, I had the Charge rising more from Paris' fall than the narrow win over Houston. This team definitely still has its issues, but the talent of players like Shu, Eileen, Happy and Hotba have been delivering in recent weeks. They could look to rebound like the Spark this stage as we head into the next one. The next grouping of teams from 15 to 11 proved to be one of the hardest for me to rank, with all of these sides certainly having showed off very high ceilings, but at the same time very low floors. Sometimes within the same week, which has made them difficult to position just right. At 15 I've left the Toronto Defiant, but above them are the biggest fallers of the week, down 4 spots to 14, the Chengdu Hunters. The LA Valiant and Boston Uprising remain at 13 and 12 respectively, as Atlanta see a nice rise of 3 places to 11. Toronto finished out the stage with a much more recognisable display across their 2 series, taking a spirited map win in their loss to Vancouver, before dismantling the Eternal in a 4-0 stomp. With the quality of players such as Ivy, Envy and Neko, this team should be competing much closer to mid-table than they did this stage, and for the first 3 weeks it looked like things were getting really out of hand. And even with this positive week, I cannot forgive that legacy, which is why they're here. That said, they now come off a confidence boosting week into a long break between stages to try and reload and try and bring this level of performance with some results against some tougher opponents next stage. I, like anyone, is a massive fan of Chengdu and their carefree attitude to 3-3 this meta, with their determination to run what they're comfortable on. Unfortunately, it's now clear that with enough footage and time under their belts, their opponents have now figured out the way to beating them, by not opting into their triple DPS shenanigans, but instead trying to force the Hunters onto goats, where they're at their weakest. On their day they can cause chaos for any opponent, as we saw against London last week, but this week's loss to the Valiant makes it clear that until the meta significantly changes, the Hunters will likely find themselves losing more often than not. And speaking of the Valiant, they finished the stage with that 3-2 win over Chengdu, that I think now firmly suggests they've gotten themselves away from the group of teams at the bottom of the rankings, with steady improvement over the course of this stage, minus a blip to Dallas. I am concerned, however, that should DPS enter the meta meaningfully, but this team is not well equipped right now, so roster additions may be needed to bolster this side after the break. As I briefly expressed in my weekly review, Boston and Atlanta are my Nemesis teams to evaluate at this moment. Just this week, the Uprising took down the previously undefeated this stage LA Gladiators, whilst the Reign seemingly did the impossible, picking up their second win in a row against New York. If I ended my statement there, you might think I was mad for these positions, but when you then realise that Boston subsequently got reverse swept by the Justice afterwards, and Atlanta, who rise having not been defeated, still failed to make the stage playoffs despite 2 wins in the same stage over the Excelsior. These teams clearly have issues they need to sort out. Yet with players like Fusions and RCK on the Uprising, as well as the Atlanta squad as a whole finding incredible form following the return of Dako, both sides need to use this break to sort out their issues and return with a level of consistency that could make them legitimate challengers for playoff spots in Stage 3. Entering the top 10, I think this group of teams from 10 to 6 may attract the most controversy, starting at 10 with the Philadelphia Fusion, down 3 spaces. The Shanghai Dragons and Dallas Fuel, despite confirming their playoff spots this week, remain at 9 and 8 respectively. It's a team that missed out, the Seoul Dynasty, drop only twice to 7, and it's the team that beat them in the Hangzhou Spark that see the greatest increase, 5 places to 6. Just quickly starting with the Fusion, some might say I still have them a little high here, but it's important to remember how difficult their strength of schedule has been, with their 4 losses coming to London, San Francisco, and New York twice. Yes, they started this stage very unorganised, with poor team coordination, but their last 2 fixtures have shown this team in a much better light, dominating the Outlaws, before putting up a fight at least for half of their series against Shock. And with the quality of players they have in this side, I think this position provides a nice fit for now. Now on to what I think is the far more contentious issue, in why I have Seoul above Dallas and Shanghai, with both of those teams making the playoffs. And crucially, it comes down to these 3 teams' strength of schedules. Dallas is perhaps the easier to explain, given their 5 wins were against Toronto, Paris, Valiant, Outlaws and the Mayhem, with some of these not exactly being comfortable either, whilst also being convincingly beaten by Dynasty only a couple of weeks ago. So unless they can show me some quality against Vancouver, I refuse to put my eggs in their basket for now. As for Shanghai, it's a similar story, with wins over Chengdu, Houston, Florida and Washington, but this time, like the Dynasty, they share a greater extent of tougher losses, to New York, Gladiators and Shock, whereas Seoul took losses to Vancouver twice, the Gladiators and the Spark. I think these 3 teams are quite close in terms of their quality, but I've just seen more competitiveness from Seoul throughout the stage against tougher teams, with tough, close losses to the Gladiators and Hangzhou, whereas in my opinion, Shanghai only really against the Shock put in a competitive loss, which is why the Dynasty remain, despite a fall of 2 places, above these 2 sides, and with Shanghai below Dallas given their loss and inferior win record this stage. Although for both of these sides, if they can put in impressive displays in the playoffs, I'll be more than happy to move them up. Lastly are the big movers of the week in Hangzhou, who I didn't think I moved up enough after last week, perhaps with them not having a quality win so far this stage. But with their win over the Dynasty and the ticket to the playoffs, this team has found its groove at the perfect time, with the team seemingly having sorted out their coordination problems on 3-3. Behind Gushui, who outside the top teams has been one of the best players over the course of this stage, I think they have a real chance to catch London off guard, so they definitely need to put in a quality performance, win or lose against them, before I end up returning them to the middle of the pack. Finally, we have the top 5 that after what feels like an eternity, finally sees some changes and movement, with the Gladiators falling 1 spot to 5, the same drop as the New York Excelsior, now at 4, so they are both overtaken by the London Spitfire, climbing 3 times to 3. But as usual, the top 2 remain glued and set in place, with the San Francisco Shock at 2, the Vancouver Titans at 1. Both the Gladiators and Excelsior had very strange weeks that saw them continue their poor trends and momentum, with LA finally losing to an inconsistent Boston side, before New York inexplicably were exploited by Atlanta in a very similar manner to their Week 3 loss against them. These 2 teams have been having it rather easy of late, so these recent losses have mounted quite some pressure, with weaknesses potentially being exposed, making their playoff series crucial towards determining whether these were one-off trends or more regular patterns heading into the break. London enter the top 5 and leapfrog into 3rd, as they claim the Atlantic crown for the stage after a dominant 4-0 over Houston, as New York slipped up. Their resurgence this stage has been very positive and been mostly led by great tank play from Gesture, Prophet and Fury, with the assistance of Bedosin on the backline. Their schedule has been very kind to them, and their loss to Chengdu showed some alarming strategy and decision making in the face of triple DPS. It was always possible that they could be a dark horse if they peak in the playoffs, although personally I think that this train of thought is over-exaggerating what they can do. To absolutely no one's surprise, it's the San Francisco Shock and Vancouver Titans at second and first. Both undefeated this stage, the Shock not even dropping a map. Extraordinary performances from players like Super, Choi Hyobin, Twilight and Bumper, just to name a few, and a rematch in the stage finals seems destined, although now probably jinxed, with Vancouver holding the 1 spot until a team can show they can beat them and claim the crown. And with that, I'd like to thank you for watching my Stage 2 Week 5 power rankings, and I hope you enjoyed. Being an exam season, I probably won't be posting for a few days, perhaps once at the weekend, but to ensure you don't miss out, please like and subscribe, or follow me on Twitter to ensure you don't miss out on this continuing Overwatch League coverage and content.